Salvete, viatores, and welcome back to Eutropius' Breviarium Historiae Romanae ob Orbe Condita. Last time we saw the aftermath of Pyrrhus' victory at Heraclea, probably the best attested moment of the war in Pyrrhus' attempted bribery of Gaius Fabricius, and I may have had a bit of a fanboy moment for Cineas, Pyrrhus' trusted advisor and diplomat. A peace offer has also just been proposed for Pyrrhus to keep the land he currently has occupied, and for Rome and Pyrrhus to become friends. But do the Romans accept? Let's find out. And here are the sources I am using for comparisons with Eutropius for this chapter, and the next chapter, and the previous two chapters. Pax displicuit, remendatumque Pyrrho est, a senatu eum cum Romanis nisi ex Italia requisisset, pacem habere non posse. So our main subject of the sentence is pax here, right at the start. Pax, peace. You may know a certain museum in Rome called the Areopagus Museum, as well as, the Areopagus, an altar of peace built by Augustus. Displicuit is our verb from displiceo. It's like to displease. So peace, displeased. Remendatumque, so we got the que, peace displeased, and remendatum Pyrrho est, remendatus and the est are going together as a perfect passive participle, with Pyrrho kind of be, well, indirect object, because he is it's in the dative case. And remendatus is from remando, which this is actually a later verb that you won't find in most in classical Latin texts. Like, you won't find it in Cicero or Caesar. And the remando means to send back word. So, peace displeased, or the peace displeased, I suppose, because this is as we saw last chapter, Cineas proposed a peace to the Romans. So the peace displeased, and word was sent back to Pyrrhus, a senatu, from the Senate. And here, there's no punctuation or anything, but I'm pretty sure this starts an indirect statement. Because eum here is accusative, but I don't think you really need. So first, cum Romanis, preposition with the Romans, but requisisset. I don't think you need an object for requisisset, because it's from recedo, which means to retreat or withdraw. And I don't think it's something like. I don't think it's a similar thing to last chapter where Pyrrhus sort of retreated himself, because eum is just from isea id, just the straight-up pronoun he. Well, really him, considering it's accusative. Well, it's. I think it's an indirect statement, so it would be accusative anyway, even being used as a subject, but I don't think it's like that because it's not a reflexive pronoun. I think it may have been like that last chapter because it was a reflexive pronoun, so he retreated himself, he moved himself back. Whereas here, I think it's just an indirect statement for he had withdrawn. Wait. Oh, wait, no. So, it's an indirect statement, but similar to Chapter 11? Yeah, similar to Chapter 11, we also have a condition. Because nisi here shows a condition. If not. See, if, and the ni makes it negative. So if not, or unless. So let's actually get the actual condition part first. So if he did not, or had not retreated or withdrawn ex Italia, from Italy, then pacem habere non posse. Well, eum pacem habere non posse, cum Romanis. All of these, it's annoying having the actual condition part in the middle of the result. It's kind of annoying how Latin likes to put things that we think need to be completely separate in the middle of something. But, so eum is sort of the subject of this indirect statement, which is why it's accusative, as well as why posse, which would be the main verb, is in the infinitive. So, he, non posse, would not be able, habere, to have, that's like just straight up infinitive rather than the indirect statement. Pacem, peace, accusative form from pax. Nisi, if he, recessit, had not retreated or withdrawn ex Italia, from Italy. And I think this is also a past contrary to fact condition, because those are shown through the conditions verb. And this is pluperfect subjunctive, which is for past contrary to fact conditions. So for the whole sentence, real quick, peace displeased, and word was sent back to Pyrrhus from the Senate. I'm going to just put in a that, just to make it sound better in English. That, let's do the condition first, not have it all in weird like this. Unless he had withdrawn from Italy, he would not be able to have peace with the Romans. Now, I talked about Cineas in general at the end of the last chapter. But let's talk more about this embassy that Cineas had with Rome. Because there's a lot that Eutropius does not say. So the Romans were truly wavering at this point. Pyrrhus sends Cineas with gifts for peace. How the gifts were received depends on the source. Plutarch and Justin say no one accepted the gifts. Zonaras, and presumably Cassius Dio, but his work here is lost, says that many gifts were accepted. And Appian makes no mention of the bribes, though he does talk about the embassy. The main piece offered was kind of what Eutropius said, which, if you don't remember, the piece was that Pyrrhus keep all the land he has already occupied with his army, and then he and Rome are going to be friends. But in the other sources, it is that all of Pyrrhus's allies remain free, though essentially under him. He and the Romans get to be friends, and he will release all the captives without ransom. Now you may be wondering, didn't he already release the captives? And yeah, that's another thing. The sources differ on when this embassy took place. Plutarch has the embassy before meeting Fabricius and negotiating the prisoner release, as does Justin. Zonaras has this after Fabricius and the release of the captives, as does Appian. The Periochae also, and presumably Livy, also has the meeting with Fabricius and the prisoner release before the embassy. So perhaps that's why Eutropius has it in this order. So it's really just Plutarch and Justin that are off, since they had the embassy happen before meeting Fabricius and releasing the prisoners. But like I said, the Romans were truly considering the possibility, even leaning towards accepting the peace. However, an old Appius Claudius, who we had seen long ago, literally like 4 chapters ago, but it's been a while, Appius Claudius heard about the Senate's wavering and had himself brought to the Senate meeting despite his blindness and old age. He made a rousing speech to the Senate, which then pushed them to fight on against Pyrrhus. And this is a pretty big thing, because it's mentioned in Plutarch, Zonaras, Livy, the Periochae, and Justin. So I guess in some of the sources, Appius Claudius is the only one to keep the Romans in the fight, whereas with the sources that don't mention Appius Claudius, that I guess it's just the Romans in general, the Senate, that still do have the will to fight. Either that or they just didn't include Appius Claudius' speech. Dum Romani userunt captivos omnes, quos Pyrrhus redidat, infames haberi. Quod armati capi potuissent, nec ante eos ad veteram statum reverti, quam si benorum hostium occasorum spoliare durisent. First, if you're wondering why the markings from the first sentence look a little different, the power went out for a split second and turned off my computer and ruined the recording. So, I just marked that up real quick. But, tum means then. Romani is our subject, userunt our verb. So then, the Romans, from eubeo, ordered captivos omnes, all the captives, quos, who, relative clause, Pyrrhus rediderat. And quos is technically the object of this clause. So then the Romans ordered all the captives who Pyrrhus had ordered, pluperfect, from redo. Well, not ordered, had returned. Because as I said, this is treating Fabricius and the prisoner, well, not exchange, but the prisoner return as being before this embassy. Infames haberi. Haberi. Oh, whoops, I forgot to actually mark the habere up there. But to be held, or in this case it might be better as to be considered, infames, infamous. So haberi, passive form from habeo, just like habere, just look at the last letter, and a lot of the time, at least with these second conjugation verbs, if it's an I, it's passive. If it's an E, it is active. So to be held or to be considered infamous. We will get into what it means to be quote-unquote infamous in a little bit, once we're done with this sentence. Quod, because armati capi potuissent. So potuissent, our main verb for this little because. From possum, it is pluperfect subjunctive. I believe quod does take a subjunctive as a conjunction. And that's why potuissent is subjunctive and pluperfect. So, because they had been able, capi, to be captured from capio, armati, armed. I guess you could also translate this, because this is just nominative plural, because armed they had been able to be captured, or because the armed men were able or had been able to be captured. But I think it's best as sort of a, like, describing the captives. So because armed they had been able to be captured. Which also means that they haven't just been captured in battle, they had been captured without even dropping the arms and trying to run. Nec, conjunction meaning and not, kind of like a negative form of et. So, and not, ante. Normally this is a preposition. More often it is a preposition. But here it's actually an adverb, meaning sooner or before. Eos ad veteram statum reverti. So this is still technically part of the order. So that's why reverti is an infinitive. So then the Romans ordered all the captives to be considered infamous, and not to... I just said watch for the I at the end, but I'm already lying to you, because reverti is active, but that's only because it's from the verb revertor, which is deponent. So it looks passive, but it's actually active. So to revert and not to revert to their previous status. And eos, I think, is just subject of this, like them just reiterating the captives, and them not to revert to their previous status. I'm pretty sure that's what's happening here. And I didn't say ante, because ante is actually working with quam here. Quam can work a couple different ways, but here, because it is with it coming after an adverb of comparison, remember, before or sooner, it has to be sooner than something, and that than is quam. Though also quam is working with the C for than if. This just often happens sometimes. So sooner than if benorum hostium occasorum spolia retulescent. Retulescent is our verb from refero, which means to bring back or to carry back. So sooner than if they had carried back, it's pluperfect, spolia, the spoils, which you could think of kind of like the loot off a corpse, hostium, of enemies, but it's not just enemies, of occasorum. We've seen this a few times, of killed enemies, benorum, which okay, this one's weird. So it's from binus, which you could see from the Wiktionary entry means to each. It could kind of be twice as well. I don't know exactly how to get to this conclusion, but it seems like it's supposed to be no sooner than if they had brought back the spoils of 2 slain enemies each. So essentially, it's like, I don't know, it feels like it's a little more adverbial even, because it's sort of that it has to happen twice, that like this is 2, but for each of the subjects, I think, because that's at least what I've seen it used as. So let's go over the whole sentence and see if it sounds like it makes more sense there. Then the Romans ordered all the captives who Pyrrhus had returned to be considered infamous, because armed they had been able to be captured. No, more so iterating the arms, because they had been able to be captured armed, and they not revert to their previous status sooner than if they had brought back the spoils of 2 slain enemies each. Is kind of awkward to get into English, honestly. This tripped me up for so long. But to paraphrase it, the Romans, or I guess more specifically the Senate, ordered that the captives, which had already been returned by Pyrrhus, were to be considered infamous until they had each brought back the spoils or arms of enemies they had killed twice. Either that or gotten 2 of the spoils. Well, not 2 of the spoils, but arms from 2 slain enemies. It's been a bit awkward to understand, but I hope that you do. Though honestly, maybe I don't care, because none of the sources that I looked at care. None of them actually mention this little caveat. The closest I can find is where the captives are temporarily returned for the festival of Saturn going on in Rome. And then afterwards, they are ordered to return to Pyrrhus. And if they don't actually voluntarily go back to Pyrrhus to be prisoners, then they're going to be put to death. So the Romans were like, no, you have to go back. It is only right. And if you go against that, then you die. But basically, yeah, Plutarch and Appian both mention Pyrrhus returns the captives so that they can celebrate the festival of Saturn, and then they go back to Pyrrhus afterwards. Now, there is a source that I was able to find for this captives being declared infamous, and that is Valerius Maximus and his memorable deeds and sayings. Valerius Maximus I have not looked at before, because he's not one of our main sources for Pyrrhus, or the Pyrrhic War. He wrote during the 1st century CE, during the reign of Tiberius, and his work is kind of just a bunch of anecdotes. I actually hadn't heard of him before this, or I just didn't remember him. Now, it's possible that since Eutropius used Livy as a major source, that we simply do not have the part of Livy that mentions this. And the Periochae, trying to be brief, just opted to exclude it. If Valerius Maximus cited his source for this, that would have been very nice, but he doesn't, so oh well. He is the only one I could actually find this little story in. Which, by the way, being held infamous, apparently it was being majorly degraded, where the cavalry had to serve as infantry. The infantry had to serve as... I didn't actually look at the Latin. The translation says slingers, but potentially just projectile infantry, ranged units. And they could not serve as guards for the camp, nor could they sleep in the tents. So, majorly degrading for the Roman soldiers, and Valerius Maximus says that they would be the fiercest fighters against Pyrrhus. Though again, how true this is very questionable, considering Eutropius and Valerius Maximus are the only sources that I know for this story. If you know of anywhere else that mentions this, let me know in the comments, because I could not find anything else. Ita legatus Pyrrhi reversos est. Ita, conjunction thus, legatus, our subject, ambassador, Pyrrhi is genitive, so the ambassador of Pyrrhus. Reversos est is perfect passive participle, except it's from the same verb as reverti, revertor. So this is just active, actually. So thus, the ambassador of Pyrrhus went back, or returned. And yeah, that's literally the whole sentence. I've got nothing more. A quo cum quaereret Pyrrhus, qualem Romam comperesset, Cineas dixit regum sem patriam videse. Scilicet tales illic fere omnes esse, quales unus Pyrrhus apud Eperum et rerequam Graeciam putaretur. Not the best reading, but it'll be better later, I'm sure. So aquo. I usually think of as a preposition meaning away from, or even by, like for agency or means. But I believe here it's for time, because it can also mean after. So after which, meaning after Cineas returning, cum quaereret Pyrrhus, so cum, definitely conjunction here, when, quaereret Pyrrhus, Pyrrhus is our subject, so when Pyrrhus quaereret, from quaero, which means like to ask or to inquire. So when Pyrrhus, this looks like Yeah, this is imperfect subjunctive, the little infinitive in there with the ending. So when Pyrrhus was inquiring, qualem Romam compereset, definitely compereset is a verb, Romam, the object, qualem, I believe it's from qualis, which it's at least agreeing with Romam. I don't think it well, no. I think it does kind of modify it, maybe? I'm not sure. It's a determiner. So, so he asked, what sort Rome compareset at, it is pluperfect. So had, I guess, found out or discovered. I feel like you almost need to just insert a to be, because Pyrrhus was asking of what sort he had found Rome to be. I guess you could also insert maybe a what sort of city he found Rome to be, or maybe a land, or what nature, what kind. It's hard to say, and I guess it just leaves a decent bit of room for interpretation. I guess you could almost say how he found Rome to be, but I think I'm just going to say what sort he had found Rome to be. Well, no, that doesn't sound great. Yeah, I think I'm just going to insert a couple words with what sort of city he had found Rome to be. I think that's what I'm going to go with, because that's what's sounding best in my head right now. So, after which, when Pyrrhus was asking or inquiring what sort of city he had found Rome to be, Cineas, dixit, said, regum se patriam vidisse. So he said, and this is an indirect statement again, so vidisse, that's why that is infinitive, said he saw patriam, a fatherland or country, regum, of kings. And I guess say he saw himself. Yeah, I think it's literally he saw himself. Oh, wait, no. The say is the subject of the infinitive in the indirect statement. So he said he saw a country of kings. Now, we've got almost just a kind of a whole jumble of words. Scilicet is an adverb. Tales illic is an adverb. Fere is an adverb. 3 adverbs in the same sentence is a little overkill in my opinion, but Scilicet is like, namely, tales such there about all to be. To put it into a better word order, namely, all were, or all there were about such. It's from tales. Yeah, so we're about such or so. And then he explains, qualis unus Pyrrhus apud eperum et reliquam Graeciam putaretur. Qualis, another determiner. Oh, wait, this is actually just the nominative form of qualem. Ha. I guess, the kind, I guess to be such a kind, or no, or, oh, yes. So, unus. Well, Pyrrhus is clearly the subject, but unus is modifying Pyrrhus, and unus, if you know any numbers, you'd probably know unus as 1, but it could also mean alone, or solely. Well, not solely, because that's an adverb, but alone. So, the kind, Pyrrhus alone, apud eperum et reliquam Graeciam putaretur. So the kind Pyrrhus alone, let's go over to putaretur, so imperfect subjunctive, the infinitive in the middle of the word with the ending, and this is from puto, actually not deponent verb, so this is truly passive, as shown by the UR on the end of the word. So puto, I think thought of or considered. So the kind Pyrrhus alone was thought of. Apud, I usually think of it as like near, but it could also mean among Epirus and the rest of Greece. So the kind Pyrrhus alone was thought of sort of to be among Epirus and the rest of Greece, meaning that everybody in Rome, Cineas found to be about as equal as Pyrrhus, while Pyrrhus was sort of top dog in Epirus in Greece, which is kind of nuts. But let's go over the sentence. After which, when Pyrrhus was inquiring what sort of city he had found Rome to be, Cineas said he saw a country of kings. Namely, all there were about such. The kind Pyrrhus alone was thought of among Epirus and the rest of Greece. Yeah, I guess you could also say considered or valued for that. The kind Pyrrhus alone was valued at among Epirus and the rest of Greece. But yeah, a city of kings. I found this specifically in just Justin and Plutarch. It's basically meant to say, well, I guess I said it already, that while Pyrrhus alone was the greatest among Epirus and Greece, basically everybody was meant to lead in Rome, because, the Senate and competition and such. Everybody was trying to be great, whereas you only had a few specific kings in Greece. And that also means that Pyrrhus, the army relied on Pyrrhus, whereas if a consul or two died, the Romans would be okay. They had plenty of capable leaders. And while going over this again, the other day I actually realized I had seen not a quote for this, but a very small reference to it in a passage of Livy. Not the passage specifically about Pyrrhus, because, again, we don't have that, and the Periochae don't actually mention this, but in the Ab Orbe Condita, Book 1, Chapter 17, that Livy is digressing, trying to argue that if Alexander the Great had invaded Rome after his conquest of Persia, that the Romans would have won, which would be a fun series of videos in and of itself, but he makes a small reference saying, would the clever generalship of one young man have succeeded in baffling the whole Senate, not to mention individuals, that Senate of which he, who declared that it was composed of kings, alone formed a true idea? Which, yeah, is kind of the point that Cineas is trying to make. He's saying that Rome had a ton of able generals and warriors, many of whom we actually saw in Eutropius. He name drops a bunch. Though he doesn't actually mention Cineas by name. It's just a very sly reference to this. Which makes me think that, alongside with Eutropius quoting it, as well as it was in Justin and Plutarch, that this story would have also been in Livy. Specifically, the portion of Livy that would have covered the Pyrrhic War. Misi sunt contra Perum duces Publius Sulpicius et Decius mus consules. So misi sunt, sent, perfect passive participle, as we have seen before, actually. Contra Perum, against Pyrrhus. Duces Publius Sulpicius et Decius mus consules. Yeah, we've seen kind of this exact sentence before, I'm pretty sure. sent against Pyrrhus were, technically, the generals Publius Sulpicius et Decius Mus. Consules, the consuls. There's really not much to say. I guess I could have actually looked more into Publius Sulpicius and Decius Mus, but they are not as well known as Fabricius, nor, I feel like, not even Livinus. I feel like I've heard about Livinus more than Publius Sulpicius and Decius Mus. Which also, that's interesting. I just realized that Decius is not shortened, while Publius is. I guess because Decius isn't quite as common as Publius. But either way, we're rearing up for another fight. Just one more time. Sent against Pyrrhus were the generals Publius Sulpicius and Decius Mus, the consuls. Certamine commisso Pyrrhus vulneratus est, elephanti interfecti, vigenti milia caesa hostium, et ex Romanis tantum quinque milia, Pyrrhus tarentum fugatus. Well, that doesn't sound very good. So, certamine commisso. We've got ablative absolute right here. I believe commissus is the, I believe that is the participle. Yes, perfect past participle from committo, and certamine is from certamen, which is battle or contest, and of course commissus, commenced. So after the battle or contest commenced, Pyrrhus vulneratus est. We've seen, what is this directly from? This is from vulnero, which we've seen a word related to last chapter with vulnus, but Pyrrhus was wounded. Elephanti interfecti. Well, wait, no, because that's just a participle as well, from interfectus. Again, these are most of the participles here are perfect passive. I don't feel like I need to say it every time, but interfectus, killed. The elephants were killed. Oh no, everything's going terribly for Pyrrhus. Vigenti milia caesa hostium. 20,000 hostium of the enemies. Caesa. Oh yeah. Okay. So caesa, perfect past participle from caedo. It means to, cut, hewn, killed, struck, that kind of thing. And it's actually agreeing with milia. That's why it is caesa and not like caesus or caesi. That's why vulneratus est, vulneratus with Pyrrhus, interfecti with elephanti. They don't have to match in appearance with the ending. They just have to agree in gender, number, and case. And so caesa agrees with milia. So 20,000 of the enemy was killed, which by the enemy he's referring to Pyrrhus, which that's not a good look. Et ex Romanis tantum quinque milia. And from the Romans, tantum is an adverb, and here it means only or just 5,000. Now these numbers I'm sure are not accurate in the slightest, but we'll get there. Pyrrhus tarentum fugatus. Another perfect passive participle. Pyrrhus fled to Tarentum. My god, that sounds like such a disaster. So let's just go over the whole sentence first. After the contest or battle commenced, Pyrrhus was wounded, the elephants were killed, 20,000 of the enemy were cut down, I guess I'll say, just for variety's sake, and from the Romans, only 5,000. Pyrrhus fled to Tarentum, just accused of moving, basically. My god. So this is supposed to be the Battle of Asculum, the second main battle in the Pyrrhic War. And, Eutropius, you're not very accurate with your battles, man. So, in Plutarch, it's a pretty clear Pyrrhic victory. Ha. The battle apparently went over 2 days. They fought, split apart at the end of the day, and fought again the next day. And apparently Pyrrhus only lost about half of what the Romans did. The elephants were actually used to great effect. Plutarch does mention Dionysius does differ from another source, the historian Hieronymus of Cardia specifically. He was actually a contemporary historian of Pyrrhus, if I recall correctly. Though his work also doesn't survive, which is a major shame. And yeah, Plutarch actually references Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who we will be talking about in just a moment. But obviously, Plutarch's account is the best one because it has the famous quote, "One more victory like this, and we are undone." This is the source of that quote, and it is spectacular. But now speaking of Dionysius. So in Dionysius, Pyrrhus does win. Apparently they have both sides have good formation, but the allies of Pyrrhus falter against the Romans first. And while Pyrrhus is dealing with that, allies of the Romans arrive, burn the Epirote camp, which Pyrrhus then sends some men to retake, but it was too late. Soon after that, the sun sets and the battle ends in a single day. The elephants did also get involved, and the Romans actually had anti-elephant wagons set up. The first that are mentioned, I'm pretty sure. First time they really were trying that. So the Romans, they're adapting. The Epirotes were actually able to counter them in Dionysius, with light troops supporting the elephants to destroy the wagons. In the end, the elephants weren't useless, but definitely not as effective as before. Though Dionysius doesn't mention actually how many died, if any at all. He says there are 19 at the start, but not how many survived. I can only assume some died, but they also assisted against the Roman reinforcements taking their camp, so I don't know. In the end, Dionysius does make it seem like it was a tougher fight for Pyrrhus than Heraclea, and like he took much more of a beating here than at Heraclea. And honestly, it's kind of more like a draw. Because even though, like, they both sides survive, like, it's a tougher fight for Pyrrhus, and his camp was taken and burned, and so Dionysius says that they had to camp just outside, and wounded soldiers who could have gotten medical attention just died because they didn't have the proper shelter. The Periochae only mentioned a second defeat at the hands of Pyrrhus. Another good old one-liner part. So again, Pyrrhus wins that fight. Zonaras, his account is interesting as he differs the most from the generally accepted narrative. The elephants drove off the cavalry, but the main Epirote infantry body is disorganized, performs poorly, Pyrrhus is wounded, and the battle is lost. Pyrrhus supposedly took heavy casualties, but the elephants are not mentioned among them. Though funnily enough, Zonaras mentions the special anti-elephant wagons. He also says that Pyrrhus deployed his elephants on the opposite end of the field, so they never actually encounter the elephants. None of these sources actually give numbers for the total losses in the battle. I think Plutarch gives numbers for how many were lost during the final struggle for the camp, but I could be misinterpreting the text. If the numbers he gives are for the whole battle, then Eutropius massively inflated the numbers, as Plutarch, citing Hieronymus, says 6,000 Romans were lost and 3,500 of Pyrrhus' men. Which I guess is why in the beginning I said he lost like half of what the Romans did, but And there we go. Chapter done. So Pyrrhus is on the back foot and retreating. We'll find out how this all comes to an end in the next chapter, but not until we have a full Latin reading and a full English reading. Pax displicuit remendatumque Pyrrho est a senatu, eum cum Romanis nisi ex Italia recessit pacem habere non posse. Tum Romani userunt captuos omnes quos Pyrrhus redirat infames haberi, quod armati capi potuissent, nec ante eos ad veteram statum reverti, quam si benorum hostium occasorum spolia retulisent. Ita legatus Perri reversus est. Aquo, cum quaereret Pyrrhus qualam Romam comperisset, Cineas dixit, regum se patriam vidisse, scilicet tales elic fere omnes esse, qualis unus Pyrrhus apud Eperum et rerequam Graeciam putaretur. Misi sunt contra Pyrrhum duces Publius Sulpicius et Decius Mus consules. Certamine commisso, Pyrrhus vulneratus est. Elephanti interfecti, viginti milia caesa hostium, et ex Romanis tantum quinque milia. Pyrrhus tarentum fugatus. The peace displeased, and word was sent back to Pyrrhus from the Senate that if he had not withdrawn from Italy, he would not be able to have peace with the Romans. Then the Romans had ordered all the captives, which Pyrrhus had returned, to be considered infamous, because they had been able to be captured, armed, and to not revert to their previous status sooner than if they brought back spoils of 2 slain enemies each. Thus the ambassador of Pyrrhus returned. After which, when Pyrrhus asked him what kind of city he found Rome to be, Cineas said he saw a land of kings, namely all there are about such a quality that Pyrrhus alone was considered among Epirus and the rest of Greece. Sent against Pyrrhus were the generals Publius Sulpicius and Decius Mus, the consuls. After the contest commenced, Pyrrhus was wounded, the elephants were killed, 20,000 of the enemy was cut down, and, from the Romans, only 5,000. Pyrrhus fled to Tarentum. If you're listening to this, then thank you very much for watching the whole episode. These have been really fun to research and kind of script and record in general, and I hope you've been enjoying them as much as I've enjoyed making them. But next chapter is the last chapter of the Pyrrhic War, so this little saga will be ending very soon. What will happen after that? I don't know. I might start streaming, doing the Latin. I might do a whole essay on Livy's arguments for why Rome would have beaten Alexander if he had invaded. That might be fun. But either way, let's see if Pyrrhus can make it out of this one. Until next time, valete, viatores.